throw in a good word about some of you others saying? No. No, really, very, very good. Very encouraging to me. Now, I know that some may be saying, but Howard, you keep forgetting to talk about giving. I'm not forgetting to talk about giving, because today I'm going to talk for a half an hour about giving, or more if we're good boys and girls, and not only today but next week and the week after, and perhaps the week after. We'll see how it goes. Now I don't have a PowerPoint for today. I was more focused on just getting it down and in order. Of course I heard that I was told by Dr. Meyer, I asked him about his technology needs, right? And of course he said, well, I'm just going to do what Jesus did. Just speak. But no, I'm not disparaging anything. It's just kind of humorous. But I will. It was just kind of humorous. But anyway, I do have this in a nice order, and my intention is to make the whole thing a PowerPoint presentation so that you can have it and refer to it. And so you may be wondering why. Oh, how come we're now just like everybody else talking about money, talking about giving? First of all, we're not talking about money. That's not what we're even talking about. But the question does need to be answered. Why talk about this? Is this just the yearly, when pastors get together or messianic rabbis get together, it's like, oh, did you talk about giving? And so for many there is this obligatory message that must be given about giving. And we don't look at it that way. I don't look at it that way. And about every 2 to 3 years, I give a little series on giving. You may not remember. You may be saying, I don't ever remember you talking about giving. Well, that tells me something right there. But no, I have proof of it. But every time it's a little different because we change, the world changes, I change. It's never the same. Can't say the same thing. It's stale, and it's always a little bit different. And so first, why teach on giving? And so, may I suggest, because giving is an act of worship and part of our walk with the Lord, as we will see. It is like the intersection of worship and our own lives and sacrifice. It really is. And it is an act of worship. Years ago, when we used to have a bulletin, we would have it in there. Worship by giving, through giving, something like that. It is an act of worship. It is another reason why we want to understand giving is because it is an act of sacrifice. And it is the most accessible act of sacrifice when you think about it. That, we might be sitting here saying, I want to serve. I really want to be involved. I like to do something. Why don't they ask me to do something? Or maybe I do get to once in a while do something. But I don't want to just sit in the pew and, I want to participate. Well, the most accessible way of participating is by putting your hand in your pocket, taking it out, and putting something in the tzedakah box. It is absolutely accessible, right? Online, we sit around and we think, how can we make it easy? I suppose the easiest thing to do would be for us all to just get in line and say, okay, everybody get in line, come up to the front. No, we don't want to do that. But, we have the QR code, we have the tzedakah box, we have all that to make it easy for us to participate And there are many illustrations in the Bible, a few in particular that we might take a look at, maybe not today, but in the next week or two, where we see these acts of sacrifice and acts of participation. That's why it's important to talk about giving. Also because it's a command. You can't get around it. You know, giving is a part of who we are and what we do. Whether we are talking about the book of Genesis or the book of Revelation. You know that giving, or we should say the theology of giving, perhaps, has not changed anywhere in the Bible. Sometimes we get the idea that in the Tanakh, in the Torah and the prophets and so on, it's an obligation. But in the Brit Hadashah, there it's supposed to come from the heart. That is tantamount to saying, the God of the Old Testament is a God of judgment, and the God of the New Testament is the God of love. Right? We have all heard that, and maybe subliminally have thought that at times. But you see, just like the fact we know that the God of Israel is a God of love from beginning to end, so the concept of giving has never changed, and giving from the heart and with right motives has never changed. Yes, there were certain obligations, Torah commands and so on, but it was never about jumping through the hoops. Never about jumping through the hoops. And so it's a command whether we're talking about the words of Yeshua or we're talking about the words of Moses. Okay? Another reason to talk about giving at this time of year is because, as I said earlier, we are in the midst of the most materialistic, consumer-driven time of the year. And you can't get away from it. Haven't you gotten emails about, this is the last chance for you to buy socks? You know, this is it. You're missing the boat. And you know what that's like. Let me just take a look. Maybe, I don't know, and so there is this, a temptation. You know, I was talking to someone this week who works at a big, kind of like a big box store. And they were saying how, like the day after Thanksgiving, you couldn't find a parking spot in this whole, huge, gigantic parking lot, right? And believe it or not, I myself, in another life, well, not another life, but in my time of just before coming to Beth Messiah to be the rabbi at Beth Messiah, I was in between ministry jobs. And I worked at the May Company department store at an upscale mall in the San Fernando Valley. Selling men's sportswear, although the only thing I know about it was wearing it. So that was a really interesting experience. But I remember that time after Thanksgiving, it was unbelievable. And we've all experienced it, at different times in our lives. But what this person was telling me was, yes, right after Thanksgiving, it was unbelievable. And I said, they must make the majority of their money this time of year. Because when I go into that particular place, like in June, there's nobody there. The parking lot's empty. You wonder, how does this place stay in business, right? Well, it's this time of year. So no better time to talk about giving, because evidently we love to, this is a time of year for spending and parting with our funds. And so a good time of year to talk about giving. Okay. And another good reason to talk, I still have a couple of more. Another good reason to talk about giving and to understand giving is because the place that is dedicated to the spiritual well-being of its constituency relies on it. It is something to really think about sometimes, that a local congregation is not part of some network of fundraising, but only exists on the giving of its constituency. Now, usually we think of that in political terms, a constituency. It means the people to whom there is a relationship. When we look at all of us, this is it. And so it is important that we understand giving. And then, frankly, the last reason I have is because we may be not doing enough of it, including myself. And it's just something that we always need to be reminded of. It can be a sensitive area to talk about, but hopefully for us it will be one of just motivation, Okay, and so now, why does giving in the context of a local congregation sometimes get a bad rap? Let's face it, it can sometimes, make your eyes roll, when we think about it. I would suggest first, because it is often framed as fundraising, rather than being part of something worshipful, and being a part of something larger than my own self for the cause of Messiah Yeshua. And because it isn't fundraising. That is not what it is. It is giving for the cause of Messiah Yeshua to the place where I am primarily receiving blessing. Okay? Now, in the last installment of this will be practical suggestions for giving. And this will come back again, this issue of prioritizing giving. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. But just, why it gets a bad rap. It's about those money-making preachers, and so sometimes we forget what giving really is. And then I do have down here, because of famous religious personalities who have demonstrated poor stewardship and sinful behavior with massive funds that have been accumulated, right? And there's lots of reasons why those kinds of things happen. A lot of it has to do with accountability and authority, and thinking that we're bigger than who we really are. That oftentimes is the reason for that. But it makes sense that when people see big names act inappropriately with giving, or in some cases fundraising, it becomes a real mark. And then, of course, that becomes reflective in the popular culture, in movies, in television, about the money-grubbing preacher. So when I became a believer in Messiah Yeshua, there was a particular time when my parents met the person who led me to faith. Woo! This was someone who, with a lot of integrity and a great person. So afterwards, my mother said to me, well, just reminds me of Elmer Gantry. Anybody even know what that is? No, never mind. Okay. Just Google Burt Lancaster. Okay. And the reason that she said this was because this person who led me to faith bears a resemblance to that actor. So you don't know who that is. Oh boy, talk about moving on in years. There we are. All right. So there are a number of reasons why giving is often perceived as negative. And finally, because of poor teaching on the subject. If you give a lot, you get a lot, right? Some teach that giving is like a quid pro quo with God, right? And pointing out some different scriptures that the reason that you're poor is because you don't give enough, or the reason you don't have this or that is because you don't give enough. There are deeper issues than a misappropriation of scriptures there. It is frankly identifying godliness and success with having a lot of money. And that is exactly what our culture teaches us. And so that is an amalgamation of spirituality and the culture. To think that there's something wrong with me if I don't have enough. Like, what do I have to learn, God? What's the lesson? Frankly, it's the very same kind of thinking that if something bad happens to me, it means God is trying to teach me a lesson. And I'm going to keep getting bad things happening to me until I get that lesson. Yikes! You know, if that is how you understand your relationship with God, there is something that we need to tinker with a little bit and understand that we live in a world that, like I was saying about Jacob, that has ups and downs and upturns and bad turns, and your level of income is not a reflection of your spirituality. It can be a reflection of the economy that we live in. It could be a reflection of the occupation that you have. It can be a reflection of the choices that you make. Not that God's mad at me, so he's keeping me from, I'm a disappointment. What are we doing? We're often putting God in the place maybe of our parents or something, and that's a whole other story. And so we need to understand that kind of teaching is insidious, and so we need the right kind of teaching on giving, on the privilege of giving, the privilege of participating in what God is doing, and the act of worship and sacrifice. That it really is, that does bring all kinds of blessing to our lives. Okay, so where do we begin? Well, we begin at the beginning, okay, in the book of Genesis. The foundations of understanding giving as spiritual people begins all the way back in the first chapter of Genesis, of Bereshit. All the way back at the beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, we read in verse 28. And God blessed them, speaking of Adam and Eve, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And then in chapter 2, in verse 15, then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. Okay? So what those two verses tell us is that part of being created in the image and likeness of God is that we are stewards of everything that there is. We are stewards of this world. God is the owner of everything, and we are stewards of it. Everything belongs to him. There are clear teachings on this all the way through the Bible. Think about a half a dozen parables of Yeshua. You know, it's not a coincidence that you read about a farmer who had workers and the farmer goes away and then he comes back and he wants to see what the people have done. Or there's a king who goes away and he comes back and he wants to see what the people have done. There's a theme there all the way through. We can take each of those apart and they all have a nuance and that kind of thing. But Yeshua's kind of teaching the same thing there. And that is stewardship and responsibility for this world. Everything belongs to him. You know the famous verse in Leviticus chapter 25 in 23 that, the land and everything in it belongs to me, but you are an alien and sojourner along with me. Right? The land belongs to God. The earth belongs to God. There's a great little passage in Psalm 50 that articulates this. I think it's beginning here in verse 12. Verse 10. For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. Oh, the cattle, that's where that comes from, right? The cattle on 1,000. You ever hear people say that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills? Yes, he does. For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird of the mountains, and everything that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all it contains. How much clearer can we be on that, right? Now, if we were an agrarian society, if we were a society that just dealt in animals and, hay and corn and whatever else I heard they grow out there, that we could understand it, that, okay, it all belongs to God, and I'm working his land, and so on. But then doesn't it get murky when you talk about having all different kinds of occupations and technology and so on? And we say, mankind has created a lot of different things and advanced things. But we need to realize the spirit of these passages is everything that there is belongs to God. Even, whatever occupation you have, the ability to do it, the technology to do it, the industry itself, whatever it may be, belongs to God. And we are stewards of whatever it is in this world. What an attitude to have, that I really don't own anything. I mean, for us to think about that means you have to really meditate on it. It's not a natural way to think for any of us, right? But it is indeed true. And as I have said before, and as I will say probably a few times in this series, the question is not really a question of how much should I part with? How much should I part with? But rather, how much should I hold on to? Because it belongs to God. And this is a very important understanding for giving, and a key to be able to give joyfully and to be able to give liberally and to be able to give sacrificially is to realize that, wow, how humbling it is that God has allowed me to serve as a steward of all that he has. So, yes, it all belongs to God. All of it. Even, by the way, when we talk about giving, not only finances, but everything that we have and that we are. And thankfully, there are all kinds of examples in the Bible from beginning to end about giving. We don't usually think of them all about giving. We think of them all in other ways and in other contexts. But for example, right at the get-go, after Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. Yes, we know about Cain and Abel. We know that Cain killed his brother Abel and so on. And the blood of Abel cries out from, the ground and so on. But if you look at this story, just the beginning part of it, it's kind of interesting. I don't know about you, but in the faith, I was raised to think that Cain's sacrifice was not received because it was not an animal. Because it was, blood atonement, animal sacrifice. I remember hearing that. But I would suggest that's not the case here in Genesis chapter 4. It says here, now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. And again she gave birth to his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Have you ever read anywhere that being a tiller of the ground is bad news in the Bible? I don't think so. Okay? So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. What's wrong with that? Nothing is wrong with that. This is what he did. It's what he was. He gave of his hard-earned work. He gave the fruit of the ground. He wasn't a keeper of animals, so of course he wasn't going to bring an animal sacrifice. He brought tomatoes. I don't know. Whatever it was. He brought the fruit of the ground. Oh no, they come from Reynoldsburg, developed thousands and thousands of years later. Wrong illustration, sorry. Okay. And Abel, on his part, also brought the firstlings of his flock and their fat portion. So the interesting thing is here is that they both approached God with a gift. That's what's interesting. You don't read before this of the need to approach God with a gift. It is intrinsic to knowing God that there is this relationship like a king and his subjects of bringing gifts to the benefactor, to whom we are the beneficiaries. Not as an appeasement, not as in fear, in foreign cultures that he'll kill us unless we give him something. He'll step on us, right? But we see here that they both gave the first and the best of what they had and what they did. Cain's problem is another story for another day. It had to do with his heart. When somebody kills their brother, there's something else going on leading up to it. It doesn't just happen one day. And so Cain had a lot of trouble internally, and that is what was going on. And so, one a lesson that I'll just throw out here, you can't win God's approval by giving. Like if I give God more, then he'll be happy. Then it'll be better for me. It's not exactly how that works, and so that's also important. But Cain and Abel, they gave what they had. We earn, most of us earn dollars, right? Most of us have dollars. We have money in some way, shape, or form. And so that's what we give. And so that is what we give. Yes, we can give our time. Yes, we can give our abilities. But that is not in lieu of taking something that is our livelihood and giving it. That is these kinds of offerings. Okay? That's very important to get. So, from the very beginning, there was an understanding of giving gifts to God. All right? You know, in Exodus chapter 23, in verse 19, you shall bring the choice first fruits of your soil into the house of the Lord your God. In Exodus chapter 35, beginning in verse 20, you know that passage. It's about building the tabernacle, right? People gave their belongings to build the tabernacle. They were moved to give. You know, it's a great passage. I won't take the time to read it, but it says, those who were moved to give, gave. We should not get the idea that giving in the Tanakh was like, you got to twist their arm to give. And it better be 10%. But now we give with a cheerful heart. Now that the Messiah has come, the Messiah really enlivens our heart to be able to do that better. Yes, indeed, but it has always been the way of God. To give out of a heart of contrition, out of a heart of love, out of a heart of being moved by a God. But we should never use that as an excuse to say, well, I'm not moved by God, so I guess I don't have to give. If we are not moved by God to give, there's something wrong with what's going on inside of us. And that is quite clear. Another passage, one that should be familiar to us at the time of Passover, is in Deuteronomy chapter 26. This one I think I'll mention. And then, you see, of course. See, did I get to page 3 yet? No. So we'll see how many weeks we go on this. All right. So now, in chapter 26, this is really very interesting. Deuteronomy chapter 26. Then it shall be when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, and you possess it and live in it, you shall take some of the fruit of the produce of the ground. By the way, isn't it fascinating that when you think about Cain, and then you think about these, the produce of the ground is really, really important. What you work at, you know, to give to God, because this was a subsistence farming. They were taking food out of their mouths to give to God here. And they did so with a joyful heart. Otherwise, just like it would not be acceptable. There's a real pattern that Cain passage is really very important. That speaks into or informs other passages of Scripture. Okay? So, that you may take some of the first fruits of the produce of the ground, which you shall bring in from your land, that the Lord your God gives you, and you shall... See, that the Lord your God gives you. Wait a minute, I'm the one that got up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm the one that was digging, and I'm the one dealing with famines and dealing with weather issues. And oh my goodness, when I got married and I entered into a farming kind of environment in my wife's family, talking about the weather, very important. Because it's like part of the livelihood. Really very, very important. Right? For us, it's which coat should I wear? Do I need gloves or not? But here we're talking about this had to do with their very existence. This is all a form of sacrificial giving. And notice that the Lord your God gives you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place where the Lord your God chooses to establish his name. Then the next number of verses is very interesting. It's kind of like the first example of liturgy in the Bible. Go and say this when you bring it. But then a little farther down, it says this in verse 10. And now behold, I have brought the first of the produce of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given me. Do we think that way? I wonder. Do we think that way when we're writing a check and putting it in a tzedakah? This is you have given this to me, Lord, and I am giving it to you. I am giving the first fruits to you. Wow. I think that changes everything, really. And you shall set it down before the Lord your God and worship before the Lord your God. See the relationship of giving and worship. And you and the Levite and the alien who is among you shall rejoice in all the good which the Lord your God has given you and your household. So again, we see this. And I'll just say this, the very last thing, and then I'll just stop here. Another place in an unexpected location is in Leviticus chapter 5, in Vayikra, in the 5th chapter. So, all those offerings, all those sacrifices and offerings were actually a form of giving. Now, giving for particular purposes, all the different offerings had a particular purpose, but they were all a form of giving. They were all a form of giving. And not just, God says this is what I better do. Because notice here, in the 5th chapter of Leviticus, we read in verse 5, so it shall be when he becomes guilty of one of these, that he shall confess that in which he has sinned. He shall bring his guilt offering to the Lord for his sin which he has committed. And then it goes on to describe it. And then if you continue reading, you see that there's all kinds of offerings that can be brought depending on what a person has. That God's desire is not that a person should jump through hoops, but that in this case, the giving had to do with a restored relationship with God. But the point I wanted to make is that they had to confess their sin. It wasn't just, according to the handbook, this is what I have to do and I'm okay. It's always been a changed heart. Always been a changed heart. And embracing that guilt offering. And what do we read finally in Isaiah chapter 53 about giving? For the sake of time, you can read it in the 10th verse. That, the one who took our sins upon himself, what does it say there? If he would render himself as a guilt offering. And so Yeshua, the greatest offering, of the one and only offering for our sins, the gift of God to humanity, certainly demonstrates sacrificial giving to the nth degree. And if we are Messiah followers, yes, we are called to be sacrificial people, but we tend to often think in grandiose terms. Like, I've got to die to self, which means I'm going to deny myself something, or I'll become a martyr for the faith. How about starting with something small? Like, I'll write a little check and I'll put it in a tzedakah box. How's that for living a sacrificial a life? Now, there's questions to ask about that. Well, how much? And what about other causes? And we're going to actually answer those things. But the point for today right now is that giving is part of the nature of God. Giving is part of who God is. And if we are image bearers of God, we are called to give. And when you look at people in the text of the Bible, we've just looked at it, the top layer. When people who are godly that we see in the Bible live their lives, in almost every story, somewhere along the way, there is giving. And so it is part of the nature of God. It is the nature of knowing God, the nature of being a Messiah, a follower. Now, next week, we're going to look at a few other illustrations. We're going to move forward, and I have purposely not spoken about any of the parables of Yeshua yet, or what we read about in all through the Brit Chadashah, so that we're not jumping the gun, so to speak, so that we see how giving is part and parcel of the life of someone who has a relationship with God. And so may it encourage us, may it convict us, and may it cause us to move forward in our walk with God. Let's pray.